discovery. What happened in the interim? Patently, it had fallen into a state not similar to that which...
Don't overwater it, don't underwater it. Use your finger, which is the best tool to determine how much water the plant needs. If the surface of the soil is dry, it needs water. If it's moist, it doesn't need water. And it's really as simple as that.
Not only are palms excellent for the house and conservatory, but there are some hardy kinds that can be grown outside.
Here's a couple that are very suitable for use in the garden. This one is called Camerops humilis. This is the European fan palm. And if you've been on holiday in the Mediterranean, you've quite possibly seen it growing on the mountainsides in Spain, where it's often covered with snow for months at a time. It's hardly down to about -12 or -13 centigrade. But a real super hardy is this one here. This is called the Chuzan palm. Its Latin name is Trachycarpus fortunii. It comes from central China, and this is hardy down to at least -15 centigrade, so it will grow in gardens in almost any part of the country. In time, it develops a spectacular hairy trunk and can go to 10 or 15 feet tall. It's a wonderful palm for the garden.
We've brought 3 of my favourite plants out of the conservatory to have a closer look at. This one is the fishtail palm, or Caryota mitis. Fishtails because the leaflets look just like fish's tails. It comes from Southeast Asia and can tolerate fairly low light, which makes it an excellent house plant. This large plant would cost £128, but in almost every case where there's a larger plant, you can find a smaller, affordable one. This would only cost £10 or £11. Now, the next plant is cheating a bit because this is a cycad, so it's not really a palm, it's just palm-like. This is an ancient group of plants which were around when dinosaurs roamed the earth. It's actually Cycas circinalis. Now, a lot of the cycad species are on the endangered plant list, but all the ones at the Palm Centre are found commonly in cultivation in the tropics, so no need to worry there. Very good house plants, but I couldn't fit this one in my house. Beechia morillii I would grow more for its trunk than anything else, I think. It's very beautiful with those rings around the bottom. Its common name is the Christmas palm because where it's planted in Florida, often as a street tree, it produces lots of red fruits around Christmas time that look just like Christmas tree decorations. In the wild, it comes from the Philippines, on limestone cliffs where the soil is very thin and poor. That makes it extremely tolerant of drought. So if you're the type that underwaters your plants, this might be the one for you.
My raised bed is just beginning to come into its own now, but of course in about a month it'll look an absolute knockout, just like it did last year. I love these acid-loving plants, but in my soil, a raised bed is the only way that I can grow them. Well, I say only way. In fact, raised beds can be a very attractive feature in the garden. You can make them out of all sorts of materials, wood, brick or stone, and with plants tumbling over the sides, they look really good. And of course, they add instant height to a flat garden. Or if you've got a sloping garden, you can use raised beds to actually terrace the garden. That's a very convenient way of working, as well as looking very attractive. And if you're getting on a bit, it's quite nice to have somewhere to sit down and perhaps do a little bit of weeding. And of course, if you're actually disabled, it will bring the plants nearer to you. But the reason for my raised bed is that my soil is limey and I want to grow acid-loving plants. So why can't I just dig a hole in the border, fill it with acid soil or peat? Well, because if you do that, the limey water from the surrounding soil soon gets in and changes it back to limey soil again. So you've actually got to raise the root level above that limey soil. So the first thing you need to do is to find out whether you need a raised bed or not. And you can do that by testing your soil with one of these soil test kits. This costs just 49p, and it's well worth doing. All you need to do is to add soil and water to the test tube and then compare it with this colour chart. And if the liquid is on the yellow side, then you know you're all right. So you fill your raised bed with your limey soil, remember, then you've got to change it to acid. And for that, you need to add something. Now, the normal thing you would add would be peat, but I'm desperately trying to help to save our peat bogs, so the last thing that I'm going to recommend is peat. Now, you could use this stuff, which is coconut fibre. But while this is a good economic proposition for compost, it's really too expensive for soil conditioning, so I couldn't recommend that. But this stuff is quite a bit cheaper. This is cocoa shell. It's a waste product from the chocolate industry, and it's quite acid, so it's a good material. A big bag like this will cost between £8 and £10, depending on where you buy it, so it's about the same price as bark, so this one is a good proposition. I can't, unfortunately, tell you how much you need, because that depends on how limey your soil is to start with. But put a bit on, and then leave it for a couple of weeks, and then give it another soil test. Now, I've used railway sleepers to make this bed, and they're absolutely ideal. Just set them in level, put a couple of stout posts behind them, and nail the posts to the railway sleepers. They'll cost something between £8 and £15 each, depending on how far away you are from the supplier and how many you want. And if you can't find a supplier, then buy one of the farming magazines and look in the classified ads. There's generally an ad in those. If you do that, then you can grow a super range of plants. The rhododendrons, you really need to go for the dwarfer varieties, because you don't want them rooting in too deeply into the limey soil beneath. The pirises are very good. Just look at those red young leaves there, and you can even buy them now with variegated cream and green older leaves as well, which make a very nice show. And there are a lot of new varieties too, with very much improved flowering, so look out for those as well. A whole range of plants that'll give you a wonderful show in your garden. But if you've got a small garden, this little raised bed is just 6 feet by 4 feet, and I've made it with 1 inch by 9 inch timber. But if you do buy timber, then do insist that you get it pressure treated with preservative. Your builders merchants will be able to sort you out on that. And on a little bed like this, you can still grow quite a wide range of dwarf and miniature rhododendrons and azaleas and pieris and that sort of thing. But I'll go into more detail on the plants and look at other types of raised beds next week.
Ever since I first saw Doctor Who, I've wanted to experience a time warp. And in a gardening sense, I think I may have found one. But where am I? Am I among the sands of ancient Egypt? Or am I in a garden nestling within the rock and heather-strewn slopes of a highland glen? Or perhaps in the tranquility of a traditional English rural village? Or even in far-off China, at the palace of some long-dead emperor? No. In fact, the heart of the potteries at Biddulph in Staffordshire. More precisely at Biddulph Grange, a garden apparently frozen in time, and recently bought for preservation by the National Trust, who have a specially raised budget for it of over £2 million. How did such an extraordinary garden come about?
We have a man by the name of James Bateman to thank for this garden. He was passionately fond of flowers and collecting plants, which was a great hobby in the middle of the Victorian era. And he came to live here in the 1840s and set about building a garden in which to show off his collection of unusual plants. He created the garden in a remarkably short space of time, about 15 years.
But obviously to create a garden of this size, it's about 15 acres, isn't it? Must have been a man of some means.
He certainly was. Most of his money came through inheritance from colliery work and iron and steel work, which abounded in this area of the potteries at that time.
And what were his guiding principles in the garden? Because originally I believe it was flat.
That's right. It's absolutely incredible the amount of energy that had to go into creating all of these banks, the rock works. Every piece of rock that you see in the garden was actually quarried and moved on site and positioned in such a way to make it look as if it was a natural outcrop.
And it is, in fact, divided into discrete areas. There are aspects of the garden quite different from one side to the other.
Yes, I think the idea of this was that Bateman, A, wanted to show off the plant collections in the sort of environment that they would have been in in the countries that they came from. But also he was trying to create the right growing environment. He was quite an advanced environmental engineer.
So it stayed in effect as a time capsule until its rediscovery. What happened in the interim? Patently, it had fallen into a state not similar to that which Bateman intended.
It was rediscovered to be this marvellous high Victorian garden in the late 1960s, and the Trust became interested and purchased it with a view to restoring the structure, because much vandalism, unfortunately, had been done in the previous 10 years.
What was the Trust's first big task in the garden?
The first thing we had to do was survey the garden, both botanically to look at the plants that survived, and also archaeologically, and then produce a plan of campaign, really, for the restoration. We had to hack back ivy and clear various areas. All sorts of other little features came to life, little masonry features that we didn't know existed. And when we dredged the lake to clean it, we found some of the bells that we see behind us, some of the ornamental tracery, some of the carvings from the roof of the pagoda, which gave us a marvellous way of recreating the original feature.
But well worthwhile, because is it not true that this garden probably is closer to an original Victorian garden than any other anywhere?
I hate the word unique, but I think Biddulph really is unique.
And here in the Chinese part of the garden, I found what for me is the most exciting plant of all. It might not look very much, but this tree is Pseudolarix amabilis, the golden larch, and this particular one is the oldest specimen in cultivation. You see, James Bateman was a friend of the great plant hunter Robert Fortune, and Fortune dug up this very tree in a forest in China 140 years ago to be planted here in the gardens at Biddulph. But these are gardens that are full of interesting trees. And in this garden, the way from China to the tree collection is through an Egyptian temple. How typical of Biddulph that you should go into an Egyptian temple and come out of a Cheshire cottage, in fact one with the monogram of JMB, James and Maria Bateman, his wife. And they of course created the garden together, and like every self-respecting Victorian gentleman, Bateman had a pinetum. Not just a collection of pine trees, but a collection of conifers in general, as opposed to an arboretum, which tended to be a collection of broadleaf trees. One of the interesting things about the plantings here at Biddulph is that many of these tree species are some of the first introductions to this country of particular types. This Cryptomeria japonica, the so-called Japanese cedar, in fact, was planted here in about 1852, one of the oldest groups still in the country. But over here is a tree that above all must epitomise the Victorian tree. Gosh, that is quite a sight. This, of course, is Araucaria araucana, the monkey puzzle tree, and this also was planted about the same time, about 1852 or 53. And this demonstrates very clearly that Bateman was interested not just in Chinese Far Eastern plants, but others from all parts of the world, because this is actually a South American tree, planted typically in Victorian town gardens, where it wasn't a success. It grew enormous and really didn't like the town pollution. Another example of Bateman's inventiveness is the way that all these trees are actually planted on artificial banks. Remember, this was once a flat site, and the reason he did this was that when the trees were small, had they been planted on the flat, you wouldn't have seen very much. Very clever. Well, the modern-day equivalent of the clever Mr. Bateman is the National Trust's head gardener, who I imagine has inherited a legacy of 19th century problems.
Well, many problems, one of which is the trees are now obviously a lot taller than when he planted them. There's 140 years worth of growth on some of these trees. And this causes problems, particularly of shade. And one of the great difficulties we do have is finding plants to fit in this shade.
And talking of choice of plants, you are sticking strictly to Victorian varieties?
And wherever we can, yes. A lot of the Victorian, particularly dahlias, no longer survive, and we may well have to find modern varieties that will look like Victorian dahlias. But the rest of the garden, we're trying, wherever possible, to put back Victorian varieties that were around.
Now, I know you've been working here for some while, but clearly there's a long way to go yet. This is just the beginning, isn't it?
Well, we've been here 3 years restoring the garden to its present state, but there are still quite a few areas left to restore. The Bowling Green is one, the Quoits Ground and the Wellantonia Avenue. And the other thing is a lot of the trees that we've planted and the hedges are going to take quite some time to mature. And I would imagine the next 7 to 10 years we'll see this garden developing and maturing quite well.
Yes, as Nigel Davis has said, the work here at Biddulph Grange is just the beginning of a continuing process of restoration. So when you come, don't expect to see a finished product in the way that you would with a restored building, for example. But it is nonetheless very exciting, and you will have your chance to view this unique Victorian garden when, on May the 1st, the National Trust opens Biddulph Grange to the public for the very first time in its long history.
Many gardeners lost their runner beans this year because the flowers fell off. Now, I think that was due to nothing more or less than lack of water at the roots. Last year was really hot, if you remember, and many areas had a hosepipe ban. Well, this year they threaten that it's going to be hot again, and many areas have already got a hosepipe ban. So we must take precautions against that lack of water. What I've done for my runner beans this year is to trench right the way through here, and I've filled up the trench with anything I can lay my hands on that'll hold water. There's manure in there, there's bits of compost in there, and I'm also using some screwed up newspapers, they'll hold quite a lot of water, and grass cuttings on the top of that. And then I just cover up with the soil again, and the runner beans will go in a double row down here. Then I shall mulch over the top in order to keep the weeds down, which stops competition for water, and also, of course, to stop evaporation. There are several materials that you can use, but the cheapest by far is old newspaper. If you just take a few thicknesses of newspaper, put it on the soil and just cover it up with a bit of soil, then that will act as a perfect mulch. I like to cover it up completely because the paper looks pretty awful. So you'll get just the odd little annual weed in the top, but it's not going to worry you at all. The alternative, of course, is to use black polythene, or there's a new porous plastic material out now, which is absolutely ideal. And, of course, underneath these, you could put a bit of this seep hose, which, when you turn it on, actually seeps water, and is a much more efficient way of using water than using a sprinkler. But of course, you can only use that if you don't have a hosepipe ban. Now, the great snag with these mulches is the fact that they're paradise for slugs. They're warm and they're moist and they're out of the way of their predators, the birds in particular. So you must take precautions against slugs. Now, I don't like using slug pellets because they're dangerous for pets and birds. But this slug tape is a lot better. You can't really call it organic because it does contain metaldehyde, but the metaldehyde is sandwiched between paper, and generally it's only the slugs that will eat it. Certainly your pets won't go for that. There's another new product on the market too, which is a bit of fun. It's really just a variation on the old beer trap. Looks like a frog, which is a bit of fun for the kids, I suppose. Consists of a couple of plastic containers, and inside is what the manufacturers tell me is an irresistible lure to slugs. You just dilute that and stick it in. Well, next week, Pippa has some advice on action you should take now to protect your apples. Stefan will be hanging by his fingernails from a high-rise balcony that is even now full of flour, while I'll be a little nearer the ground, continuing with my raised beds. And, of course, more jobs for the week from Barnsdale. Goodbye.